Hey, what's up? It's Sam. I just wanted to let you know that the Light Pod is now a video podcast, which means you can watch it on Spotify. Yep, that's right. Or you can go watch it on our YouTube channel. So pull out that phone or maybe put it up on the big screen. Everything is in high definition after all. Enjoy this episode.
Owners don't buy drawings, they buy buildings. There's something cool about, I feel like engineering and architecture and design is having its moment in the sun as we sort of think about our built environment a little bit, and we should be prepared for our roles in that relationship to change as the tools change.
So it's interesting to ask, are we keeping up with industries? My question is, are we keeping up with our own industry in the way that they're asking us to deliver our work?
But that closeness and that spirit that as we all get better doing what we do and we all collaborate, that elevates the profession as a whole. That certainly excites me.
Maybe we can get into that. I'm kind of curious about other people's thoughts.
So whether it's clients, owners, people across our firm, I really just want to work with the people that challenge us, that know what we do, that respect what we do.
One of the things that I'm seeing AI really shaking up is it's a general purpose tool.
Maybe where it's now changing is the fact that we can theoretically create the image in our mind.
If we're trying to create a realistic looking rendering, I'm not sure that...
Is there going to be so much of the focus on the tech skills to produce it that the ability to actually do the design takes second place?
And we've, I think, very quickly shifted our viewpoint of the big software providers to a partner, not a transaction.
And then as a competitive person, that just means I have to raise my game more.
We as a discipline really need to think about what it is we're not doing.
The manufacturing procurement process cycle is unbearably terrible.
Is this the best way to do it? Is there a new way to do it? And not sort of say, this is the way we do the thing.
They know that we have an expertise to deliver a project that's going to last. And for us to do that, frankly, we all need manufacturers to really be delivering at a higher standard and have higher expectations of what they're doing around circularity.
I want folks to be comfortably uncomfortable. You should be comfortable in the skill set that you have, the foundation that you have, but maybe not know how you'll get there.
In a way, everyone's kind of a lighting designer because you always regulate how much light gets into your eye.
Welcome to the Light Pod, built by Light-Eye, the #1 podcast for the people, process, and the product behind design, all with a little love for light along the way. I'm your host, Sam Corbel, and today it's the State of the Union. We're looking at lighting and lighting design and really just design in general, what's going on in this space at the end of 2024 leading into 2025. We're so fortunate and blessed to have 4 amazing, brilliant minds with us today, who I might mention all call Colorado home. We have Lisa Bartlett, who's a lighting director for AKLD Lighting Design. We have Reinhardt Swart, who is an associate lighting designer and works on building performance at Smith Group. We have Michael Lindsey, who's an associate principal at HLB Lighting. We have Jay Wratten, who's the digital lead for the United States for WSP, the largest engineering firm in the world.
That's the rumor.
I think what's so wonderful about having all of you here is the different walks of life that you're currently in, but also the journeys you've taken to get here. You all have a unique common passion, and that is for the built environment and for design. But what you do with it and how you practice it, and certainly how you think, is not the same. And that's the beauty of a conversation like this. Hopefully, as those who listen to it today dive into each one of your minds, their own thoughts percolate to the top. And as a community, we continue to push the excitement, the optimism, the hope. We solve some problems along the way, and we don't curb our enthusiasm. We elevate our enthusiasm. Before we get into it, though, this conversation is made possible thanks to our partner, Nightingale, lighting powered by purpose. Nightingale creates luminaires that go beyond expectations in healthcare environments, focusing on the people and well-being. not just spaces or treatment. If you're passionate about lighting's impact and you want to discover the latest lighting innovations, they'd love to hear from you. Visit nightingalelighting.com/discover to know more. Now let's get to know our guests a little bit more. Everybody, if you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, what you're most excited about today and what you're working on that keeps you going. Go ahead, Lisa. We'll go around the table.
There's so much to be excited about in our profession, and I would say that local to where we are right now, and this conversation came up at a joint lighting event today. Reinhardt was there, so with IALD, IES, and Wild, we were volunteering for Food for Thought, and I had a couple of conversations with folks about how close-knit our lighting community is in Colorado, even though we all are doing a lot of different things in different areas. But that closeness and that spirit that as we all get better doing what we do and we all collaborate, that elevates the profession as a whole. That certainly excites me in the midst of some of the challenges that we have about cost pressures on projects. And there's more that's not heavy, but is on my mind about where we're going as an industry for longevity that is both a challenge, but it's exciting at the same time. Trying to think with greater depth in projects and bring rigor and a level of enthusiasm and excitement are things that keep me showing up every day with a big smile on my face.
Awesome. Thank you. Reinhardt, tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, my name is Reinhardt, and I'm a lighting designer as well as a building performance analyst at Smith Group. Lately, I've been really, really into computational design. And learning how technology and the different workflows that we do influence our process, essentially. And the thing that really gets me excited is that I think our industry is feeling a lot of maybe external pressures. Things are evolving quickly, and I think that pressure gives us kind of a kick in the butt to reevaluate where we're at, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we're going to kind of bring together the younger designers and young people who really understand a lot of these things and let them sort of in a way, run wild with our help and our guidance and mentorship. So I'm really excited about the creativity that's about to unfold, just generally.
Do you think, I'm hoping that you've looked outside of our industry too, when you say a kick in the butt, do you feel like we're behind? I mean, we're going to be behind the tech world for it all, but like, does it feel like our industry is lagging and now needs to catch up?
That's a really good
Our
question.
industry being the lighting industry or the design industry?
I would say lighting design industry because that's what I care about more than anything. But I guess design and industry in general, yeah. Like, does it feel like we're?
That's a good question. I think it's maybe a yes and a no. I think there are aspects in which architecture moves slower than a lot of industries, just by the nature of our projects and the work that we do. But I do think that we're advanced in a lot of ways, but I think we're slow in a lot of ways. So we're I think personally, pretty slow to adopt some technology. I think for some of the right reasons, and maybe we can get into that. I'm kind of curious about other people's thoughts. But it also means that we're working in slower ways in a lot of times, I think. And I think maybe other people have other experiences, but it seems to me that construction and our building industry is just making us work faster and deliver quicker. And I'm really curious to think if we're keeping up with just our own internal struggle. So it's interesting to ask, like, are we keeping up with industries? My question is, are we keeping up with our own industry in the way that they're asking us to deliver our work?
Michael, when you look at what you're excited about today, where are you at?
As I think about it, I still am most excited. What gets me excited is the people aspect of it all, whether it's for me, the first and foremost is the people that I work with every day, the staff that we have, whether it's here in Denver or across our firm. That's why I really joined the industry. I loved the people that I was working with. I had a good time with them. Let's keep doing it. Now in the position that I sit, right, it's the responsibility of keeping work coming in, keeping them employed, keeping them excited with the work that's coming in. And so the people aspect side of things still drives me. I then think about it also of the people that we work with. I don't have time to work with people that I don't enjoy working with. So whether it's clients, owners, people across our firm, I really just want to work with that people that challenge us, that know what we do, that respect what we do. And so doing things like this to continue to elevate the industry is really exciting to me.
How about you, Jay? What's got Jay fired up right now?
What's got Jay fired up right now? I mean, I think the comments are interesting here because there's some themes for me that I agree with. You know, Reinhardt, your comment about challenging ourselves and asking questions, that's been a big part of my role for like the last year, is looking at how do we change the business model and how do we change the way we approach projects, and are there different opportunities for things that we should be looking at that are going to achieve similar outcomes or our clients' desired outcomes, but in a different way. And we can talk a little bit about that. I think for me, the thing that I've really enjoyed in the last years, and I think it's a combination of where I am in my career, where I am in my life, and I think a little bit of the firm I work for, is we have a huge platform within WSP to build from. And I'll see things come across my desk like we have a FEMA response team. When hurricanes like Helene come through, we're out there responding the next day, checking if people are safe. And that's like really inspiring and empowering. And I think I've started to realize that there are challenges to our infrastructure in this country, to the built environments that we have, that we can start to solve that help all of us, all of humanity. And I think earlier in my career, I thought a lot more about the project. I thought a lot more about maybe me and my design. And there's something cool about, like, I feel like engineering and architecture and design is having its moment in the sun as we sort of think about our built environment a little bit. And that's inspiring.
Everything's starting to really come together more, as opposed to you do this and pass the vellum and I do this and pass the vellum.
Well, I almost think there was a point where it felt like we had gone down a path of really, I'm going to talk about design here for a second, really bespoke tools for our business. Like, lighting used AGI, and, architects used, I don't know, whatever they would use, Revit for this. And so we had these tools, right? One of the things that I'm seeing, like AI really shaking up, is it's a general purpose tool. So when you look at like Microsoft's big boss the other day said, we're looking at big bets in AI on self-driving cars and robots. We're looking at big bets on making buildings run more efficient. And we're looking at big bets on solving medical research. Same tool, same general purpose tool, AI. And it's like, instead of having all these really bespoke things, I'm actually seeing a lot of our workflows and our opportunities kind of come together. And I think that's going to enable us to maybe start asking different questions about, like, what are the challenges we're solving? When we're doing the design for an airport, are we also thinking about self-driving cars? Where historically we were thinking about the people. And, I think you responded to my LinkedIn the other day when I'm sitting in the United Lounge and this robot with a trash can came by, and like nobody freaked out. Like, it was just like, oh, hey, a robotic trash can. And people just put their trash in it. And I thought, we are really in a different place as a society where robotic trash cans don't raise anybody's eyebrows.
One can argue that the built environment has always transformed our lives, right? It's transformational to create a space that somebody walks into, especially for the first time, and there's a moment that happens that you all worked on, that you all said, maybe we can do this. What does it mean to you today as you look at what you're doing and how you see that through the lens of always transforming lives?
I do think, again, it goes back to what I'd mentioned about people and their experience and what we do in the design community. And I think about it of actually my parents. My parents have always been very supportive. And if you ask them what I did, they would tell you, but do they really understand it? I don't know. I hope so. But to me, I love the fact of working in a space in which there are public areas that they can go and see and interact with and go to. And I can kind of point to and say, hey, I did this. Other people are experiencing what we do in different ways. And for me, that's my little selfish way of, like, I love the public stuff of being able to kind of show folks that I've done something. I know kind of what I'm doing. And so I don't think that's changed from when I started to where we are now. And I think that'll continue. And that's just kind of the lens that I look through it of how are people experiencing it. And yeah, there's pride in what I do and wanting people to recognize that sort of in the built environment.
There's a permanence there. I mean, I think when I remember when I was living in San Francisco, and a lot of my friends worked for one of the tech companies, right? And I remember having a conversation like, when you retire, what are you going to point back at? Because none of the things that you worked on are probably even going to be relevant still, right? They would have been changed into something else or whatever, and they're all, and that's not to demean that market, but I always took a lot of pride. The first time I saw one of my projects in the Super Bowl on TV, I was like, this is why I went to school. This is cool.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying about like a sense of pride of being able to point and being like, I did that.
Yeah.
You know.
The first time I walked into a project I designed as an architect, I walked in, it was a bank in Western Colorado, and I looked up, and the thought in my head was, wow, somebody let me do this. Yeah. And it's my husband points that out. He's kind of in the same category as those friends. To him, it's astonishing that what I do and we all do is we're contributing to design that has these finished outcomes that people experience that impact and can transform lives for better or for worse, which I think brings with it a lot of obligation about the way that we practice. I love, to your point, that in our discipline, it is so abstract and so technical that to kind of take that raw material and go from the vision to the finished product, I think from having practiced architecture, interiors, and lighting substantially, the biggest hat trick is lighting design, because it is so abstract and it requires so much creativity, but then it is so technical. So that's, I like the transformation part. I would agree.
We'll jump in, and your story about like telling your parents what you did and not quite understanding reminds me of when I was in college. My mom would always say, oh, he's a lightning designer. And I thought that was just the funniest thing. It took a while to understand kind of, and it's maybe still the same thing, not quite sure what I do. But I like all these comments, and I really agree. I mean, so selfishly, it's something about being able to put something beautiful in the world that people, improve their lives through the work that we do, whether it's healthcare or their work environment, or that's a really special thing, I think. And as designers, we get to do that. And I think that's really powerful. And light is one really important aspect to doing that. The other thing I really like about the transformative aspect of what we do is how we talk about lighting. And this is your point about the abstractness of it. When I talk about light, I talk about it like it's a object or like a material,
a
right?
medium.
And when you start talking to clients like this, or conceptually, metaphorically, I think very quickly people connect to it. And I kind of had the thought in my head, I always try to remind myself that if I've done my job well, the building is beautiful and it's working well, but I've also sort of like connected the owner or the end user to light in a different way. So when they turn on their favorite, lamp at nighttime, they see the light differently. But whether they know it or not, I feel like that's a really interesting thing, because it is so abstract, but it's in the world, it's in there, and we use it every day. The other thing I like to think about is that, in a way, everyone's kind of a lighting designer, because you always regulate how much light gets into your eye. You put sunglasses on, or you dim your lights, or you close the curtain. People are always regulating their environments. And so in a way, I think people have a foundational understanding of light, whether they know it or not. And we get to play with it in a really interesting way.
They have opinions. It's a very personal, I think lighting is very personal. And the thing that was always interesting to me is like, I think to your point about like the hat trick, like it doesn't really come together until the very last minute. Like when you turn the lights on.
And after
for the
you've
first
aimed.
time.
And after you've set the controls, the
But
dimming.
at that point, you're years into a project, likely,
Yes.
and you've been kind of trying to explain this idea, this vision you had in your head for 12 months or something like that, that there's a certain amount of faith that owners take in lighting designers, because you can't really show them. It's not a material sample. It's not a budget you can show them. It's like, trust me, it's going to feel great.
What are you seeing as the most successful ways that you are presenting to clients to help with that buy-in? Like, what is that looking like for you that's maybe different to what it was, say, 5 years ago?
I've always found the most success being able to tap into experiences that people have had, as well as nature in particular. People, it sort of ties in with what you were mentioning, Reinhardt, is that I think in some respects, everyone is a designer, especially as it relates to light. People can walk into a space and can tell you whether or not it feels right or doesn't. They may not be able to pinpoint why, but I feel like inherently there are just things that people know, and whether or not it's the right fashion with it. So I've always had the most success if I can point people to a space they're in, a place that they've been, or in that imagery of nature to talk about light and shadow play or the color of light in the morning versus in the evening or those type of things. So I don't know if much has changed with it. I found that that's where I've had the most success. So imagery is still powerful. Maybe where it's now changing is the fact that we can theoretically create the image in our mind that we've always been, looking through magazines and everything trying to find. And, it's never just quite right. That now theoretically we can use the tech tools that we have to create that image and manipulate it. Now our job as practitioners is just to make sure that clients understand it was generated in that way and not real. Doesn't mean we can't do it or that it can't be, but just so you know, this is meant to be inspirational and to communicate part of a story, not to reflect, I guess, the reality of where we sit.
So I'm surprised. I have been surprised that if you look at, I'm not a gamer, but I've seen enough of it online, the environments that are being created virtually are incredible, right? And we have fully immersive. I was on a plane the other day and a guy was watching a movie on his VR glasses. That threw me for a loop. The robot didn't shake me up, but seeing a guy on a plane with the Apple glasses on freaked me out. Why is it that is lighting design using those kind of virtual environments? It feels like a natural fit, but you don't see it. I haven't seen it.
I think it's coming. I think we're right there. I think that especially the tools like, this is going to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about, like Unreal Engine and how they've built, kind of in the video game world, those are now going to start migrating and have into what we do and our process. And so I think that it is there. And we're all hesitant. Anything new, anything changed, people inherently are a bit more hesitant with it. But I think that's what we're going to start seeing more and more coming into play with it all. And that's why we have to have talented people that know how to navigate that world,
I'm curious, Reinhardt, because this may be up your alley more than anyone's, if you have found an image generation AI tool that's effective, because I've experimented with a lot and there are really corny things that happen.
I think it depends on what the question is, like what we're trying to answer. Because if it's really conceptual, then there are many tools out there that do that. If we're trying to create a realistic looking rendering, I'm not sure that it totally exists yet. I don't think there's like a magic tool out there that has that ability right now. What is interesting to me is the gaming thing is a really interesting point, and your question is a really good one, is there are people outside of our industry trying to do some of these things that are not lighting designers or designers the way that we think about designers, but they have the technical know-how to pull these things off somehow magically. And I think that's a really interesting thing that has not existed in the past. Maybe I'm wrong from our industry, but to answer your question more directly, I have seen a really interesting. I follow a lot of people on LinkedIn, and I forget his name now, but he's been developing a custom sort of. I don't want to get too technical, but it's essentially like a LoRa, an adaptive way to create images, but he's trained it on different aspects of light or architecture. And he's now built a tool set that's like an interior rendering LoRa. And the images he is producing is incredible. They look like magazine photographs.
It's been built it's been trained for that purpose, right? It has the domain knowledge.
Exactly.
That like what we're seeing right now, if you pick Midjourney, is not trained on architecture. Right. So you get those aha moments and you're like, oh. And I think you're right that we're going to see specialized versions for certain industries coming out with the domain knowledge. I think Autodesk is going to get there pretty quickly given the base of information they have. That's my personal view. I think when you look at Bentley buying Cesium, we're heading definitely into virtual worlds quickly. That's going to be pretty cool. I know I dropped some names there, but...
What's Bentley and Cesium?
Bentley is Autodesk for non-building people, so it's primarily horizontal stuff historically, so roads, bridges, tunnels, that kind of thing has been designed in Bentley. Cesium is the thing that puts satellite imagery on the side of buildings in Google Maps. And so when a horizontal infrastructure, tool, like think of Autodesk again for roads, is now able to map the real world onto everything around the road you're designing, you are very quickly, at a click of a button, able to create these kind of virtual worlds, to your point. You add a physics engine on top of it, Unreal Unity, you're going to get there quite quickly.
Just one more thing. I think to go back to your question and a little bit related to this, there's another tool out there. It's on GitHub. I think it's open source. I forget the name. It may be relighting now, but you can take an image and sort of, you can talk about key light, fill light, and a lot of it's for like people and photography lighting, but very quickly change the lighting environment without changing the actual object in the image. And that's really fascinating because now they're playing with the sort of the light context of an image using the algorithms that they developed and the things that they've trained.
The virtual physical model stays the same. The people are in the same place.
Exactly.
But you're like, here it is like this, here it is like this.
Yeah, it's like building nighttime, daytime.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
That's helpful.
So my answer to your question that I asked is I think what has held lighting back a little bit has been fees. We could have done some of those immersive environments, but it was too expensive to build them. And what I have really liked for where we're seeing technology go, where we're seeing Gen AI go, is it's democratizing some of those tools to the point where you can generate it for relatively cheap, a fairly high quality, even Midjourney. If you think about the amount of money we put into conceptual renderings, or when most of us started our careers flipping through magazines and trying to find the right concept image, if you can say, I want an image of XYZ, and okay, maybe 9 out of 10 are wrong, but you can get it quick. I think that's going to also unlock that potential is we just didn't have the money to do it.
We're always trying to find more time, right? The one thing we can't create more of is time. So how do you improve your process to get to the finish line faster with hopefully not impacting quality? And I think, Lisa, what you mentioned is that that process can be bumpy, but hopefully it's faster. And that while there's a different frustration point, like that iteration of imagery, maybe you have to do more iterations, but hopefully still in less time to communicate the story. And so I think what we're going to continue to find our role and our process evolving. And that's what I think at least the design community is well set up for, is I think inherently we know that design is not a straight line. And so I think we're oftentimes a bit more accepting of new ways of going about it, new tools at our disposal. Navigating it can be tricky, but that's, I mean, even the generational piece is having those different generations as part of the conversation to get all of that input and still continue on that path together.
There's a lot of trust that happens to bring all of this to the world. Jay, you mentioned how like Gen AI is bringing common tools across all these trades and everything else. So when we look at, let's just go with the next year. Where do you think the biggest opportunity for you to better communicate with your client is going to come, and what's going to trigger that?
I was at a conference recently, and I'll credit KP Reddy was the guy speaking. So he runs a firm called Shadow Ventures, venture capital fund. And he said two things that stuck with me. He said, owners don't buy drawings, they buy buildings. And he also said we should be prepared for our roles in that relationship to change as the tools change. And what he was really talking about is that our business sells time. That's the mechanism by which we generate profit, right? We base our jobs on that. And that time, for the most part, is built in the amount of time it will take us to generate a set of instructions to build something, right? That is kind of core to how we think about what cost is. But if you took that and threw it away and said, well, actually, we can generate all the instructions with a push of a button, we come back to the question of what was the vision? What was the concept? Is it compelling? Is it worth it? Because you can have the instructions tomorrow if you want them. And I've challenged clients. I said, if we went to a design meeting, say we're all working on a project, and they said, hey, we want a building looks like this and this and this, and we kind of agreed on the concept. And I said, great, I'll have the 100% CDs for you tomorrow. Would they still pay the same price? And they'd be like, well, I'm not paying, XYZ, right? So what do I think is going to happen in the next year? We're going to be really looking at, I'm not directly answering your question, but we need to focus on what are the outcomes we're creating and why they're worth paying for, because the way we create value in our firms is going to change significantly. Not in a year, I don't think. In 5, probably. So it's incredibly important that we communicate why we are better than him. What differentiates us, not what makes us the same, because that stuff is all commoditizing, is my personal view.
I mean, I think that that's interesting because it touches on, to me, the fact that we've always been selling expertise, and like we've alluded to, the fact of clients come to us and we kind of have to just say, trust us, we know what we're doing.
Reputation.
In 18 months, in 2 years, I promise you'll love it, right? Yeah. So one of my, not concerns, but I do think what we'll need to navigate is the fact of experience. You know, our predecessors have built the foundation of this industry and put us at the table when we didn't need to be. Now it's our job to continue to keep that seat warm, right? And the younger generation coming in won't have that experience. So how do we ensure that we absorb as much of the experience and the bumps and bruises that all of our predecessors have felt over the years before they appropriately head off into retirement? Because that's where, to your point of commoditizing, and perhaps the deliverable gets faster and those instructions are easier to deliver on, it's not going to be right. We need the experts at the table to say, I see what we're trying to do here, but you can't do that, right? It's a lot of what we dealt with in the first wave of Revit and BIM, right? You can build the virtual building and it's great. And then a contractor looks at it and says, there's zero chance you can do that. And here's why, right? Like, right, and we're going to continue to navigate that, but we still need to have those experts at the table to be able to look at and distinguish
100%.
where, you know,
expertise is what will defend our value, if I can say it that way. Because I do worry there's going to be a race to the bottom in some places where it will become quite cheap. You and I were talking about this before we started the call. I'm so used to working virtually. The call, the one we're having together, that it will be easy to underbid, not just each other, but just in general, if we stick to how long it takes to create those instructions and we don't lean on, but that's not what you were actually buying.
But there's another layer to that. So I'm curious, as you were saying it, I don't know if you could see this querulous look on my face.
I think you were about to challenge me.
I was taking it in, and I was trying to formulate, why is it that I have a different sense of where things are going, not to disagree with what you were saying, but I think it comes down to maybe the arenas in which we're all respectively practicing. So large systems and building with a lot of engineering focus. I would say, from my perception as a lighting designer, and you are a lighting designer as well, but that there is perhaps a little bit more of that hands-off expertise approach where, in the world, for instance, of luxury residential lighting design, which is AKLD's heritage and of which we continue to do that work, what drives the selection of designer in many ways is there are multiple firms that may present qualifications in a proposal, and everybody can show a beautiful portfolio, but ultimately those relationships and a client wanting to take a journey with someone to walk with them that they feel they can trust and they have great expertise. I see it as it's very old-fashioned, but that the relationships continue to really drive what is happening through design. Now, to your point about what I heard you saying was that we are all in this industry trading hours for dollars, right? You set your fee based on how many hours you think it's going to take. You hope to build in a profit margin. You've got your overhead multiplier. Ultimately, I would see the place that our profession has the most room to grow, and something that is a potentially positive outcome for lighting designers of the IALD's ethics and bylaws change that just took effect this fall, is that it allows lighting designers an avenue, should they choose to do it, to earn passive income through royalties and licensing of products. So I would see that as being an area where I expect to see some movement in the next year as lighting designers who are like chomping at the bit, or as we know the actual phrase is champing at the bit. That's the grammatically correct form. That there are going to be those who start moving into product design and being able to have licensed product with royalties. So I think that would be a place that I would see change, back to your question, in the upcoming year. But I certainly hope, I didn't come into this industry to sort of create the most efficient outcome, although I do love efficiencies. To me, you were talking about people. The journey with clients and with colleagues and with the firm and thinking about the outcome for the users really motivates me. So I would lose my interest rapidly if it became how do we create this system that is efficient and as profitable as possible, and we'll just collapse the time and space, and here's your building, presto. That would not be the passion that keeps me in the industry. So I am sure some of what you're saying will come to pass, and I hope that we still have those journeys where our clients hire us because they feel that we bring not only expertise and passion and knowledge, but also they just darn well like hanging out with us,
I was just going to say a quick point is your instructions thing is interesting. It's a really good, I think, thing to bring up. And maybe I'm thinking off the cuff here. Maybe the question I wonder is who's writing those instructions? Are we, and who's actually creating the instructions? And my second question is, does the client want to be involved in helping to write the instructions? Because I feel like it's one thing if we just give them here's what your building is. I think we may lose a little bit of something there. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong here or can't describe it well. But a client wants to be involved in the project that we're designing. We design for them, but we design with them. And if we just give them instructions, I feel like that's not. I think it could happen,
part of the process.
But there's something deeper maybe in the way that we interact with our clients that allows them to be involved in the instruction writing.
So I totally agree with both of you, and I don't think our views are mutually exclusive. I wonder, when we all started, we did everything in person, right? So every client interaction was, I'll be at your office at 2. We'll roll out a set of sketch paper. We'll talk through this. The fact that at least I'm not seeing that happen as much. So much of it is on a screen. So much of it is virtual. Can we build those relationships? Will we build relationships like that the same as we used to? Because I think you're right. People still want to hire someone they trust, they like working with. How do we build those and maintain those relationships? It's something we spend a lot of time, and I think all of our firms probably spend a lot of time thinking about who are our key clients? How strong is that relationship? Are they going to come back to us? Repeat work is a huge part for our businesses. Yeah. How do we continue to build that trust so that it doesn't become transactional, so that they're not just buying a set of instructions? Because there will be an easy point to get. You can get those anywhere at some point.
Well, and what it makes me think of, and I'm sure there's plenty of examples out there in the social atmosphere that I just can't think of, but the pendulum swings that we all have, right? Of, well, remote work is great, and look at all these things I can do, and I'm saving all this time. I know for me personally, I now have swung completely the other way of, my goodness, I need to be in person. And the client relationship side of things, I think that can be a differentiator if a client has always had the virtual side of the world. And if you say, well, why don't I come over? Or the beauty of being here in Denver is the fact that you can more or less get anywhere in the States within 3 hours. And just say, you know what? I can get on a plane. Why don't we sit together and talk through this? And then maybe you go get some food after or something like that. I think that can be the differentiator of where we stay relevant, continue to build that relationship, because it goes back to what we talked about. We're in a relationship business. I think most businesses are, but not only are we developing relationships with client, owner, but then the people interacting with our building. And yes, we can't meet them in person, but that's always what's in our mind, right? Yeah. And so I'm somewhat not expecting, but I would love to see, and I will be pushing for over the next year, more of that swing to get the personal touch, to be in front of people in person. And not completely throw money out the window, but no, I didn't budget or plan for it. But hey, this is more important.
When it's interesting, because back to his question about what will happen in the next year, we talked about how would we use potentially virtual environments to communicate concepts. It will be so easy to say, just put on the headset, I'll send you the file.
when we think about this new wave and age of technology? What might it do that we will regret as an unintentional consequence?
If there's a fear, it is the industry we're in, is the passion we've spoken about for the last hour something that is shared by the generation coming up? Or do they see, and one of the things they were talking about in the engineering program is when Elon Musk is flying, catching rockets with chopsticks, mechanical engineering looks a hell of a lot more fun to those kinds of employees. And what I'm seeing, and I mentioned at the start about WSP, is like I see a lot of mission driving why people come to certain firms. And I guess I'm just wondering if lighting design is seen as an attractive place. And you were speaking before we started, I think, about the TCU and the great students that are coming out of there. So possibly there is, but it was kind of eye-opening to see the trending down in enrollment.
Civil engineering, most of all.
Civil most of all.
Civil most of all, which should be frightening for all of us. Just because that's the building block on which all of our projects are built. So.
Well, but I do think, it's interesting because I don't know if it's been any different recently, but there has always been that fear of talent and passion and interest in what we do. And I stumbled into lighting. We can't rely on that, right? Like, and it's something that you do have to think about now and even earlier to say, how do we get into elementary schools to not try to teach them about light, but get them excited about it, or with architecture or with engineering? And even more so, how do you do that into, frankly, underserved communities? Because you don't know what you don't know, right? Like that's what you had mentioned your daughter. I have a 3.5-year-old. My biggest fear as a parent is, what if she has the talent to be the most amazing painter out there, but I never get her a paint set?
Back to that question of fear, and it's sort of related to what you're talking about, but one of the things I take very, I don't know if seriously is the right word, because I really enjoy it. Having a lot of gray hair and a lot of years of experience, I enjoy working with younger team members and helping them understand how we can approach design in a way that is less based on, you can build that building in Revit. That does not mean it's buildable. That doesn't mean you understand how to detail. That doesn't mean you understand how things are constructed. So my biggest fear, the more we move to virtual tools, I guess I made a note about 3 different parts here. Number one is that clients are going to expect that the outcomes are literally what they're seeing, which we all know that danger from renderings. We've all experienced that, where they're renderings and they're like, but the chair isn't blue. You showed me a blue chair. It's like, I'm the lighting designer. I'm sorry, I didn't have anything to do with the chair's upholstery. So the expectation for things to be literal. The second part is that there's more of a focus, like I was talking about, on the ability to manage the tech than there is to understand how things are actually built and how they're going to function and operate. So especially with the younger generation, as those of us who are sort of aging out of being completely current with the latest tech tools, and so we're relying on others for that, is there going to be so much of the focus on the tech skills to produce it that the ability to actually do the design takes second place. So that's fear number 2. Fear number 3 is just that there will be, I guess it's the same as 2, there's a removal of the full understanding of the design and the process of design that leads to a good outcome. So those are, I'm answering your question literally, Sam. Maybe that's not even relevant anymore, but I was like, okay, I want to think about this. So what do you guys think about that?
No, I think it's a valid fear, is that having too much trust in the output of a program than the understanding of what needs to go into it. And, I always think back to my first time doing lighting calculations, and I did one and I was proud. And my project manager looked at it and said, you should not be getting 300 foot candles on a patio from a sconce, right? And I had messed up the light loss factor, right? Data in, right? I had put 9 instead of 0.9 or something like that, right? So
You didn't even realize it.
no, because I didn't know what that meant, right? And so I think, I don't have the fear of technology or those things taking our jobs per se, but I do worry, like you just alluded to, the talent coming in, understanding and trusting that gut reaction and having that gut reaction of what's coming out. Is that real? Is that the reality of what this will be? And, you have to go through it.
I fear that my fear personally is that our leaders aren't adapting quick enough to how these younger designers are adopting technology. And I think there may be a false dichotomy, if I can call it that, between technology and design. Design fundamentals are important, but also there's going to be new tech coming out that we're not going to understand, and we have to empower younger designers to be able to use that tech. And then we can vet the outcomes and those things, but they can have those opportunities to develop the technology that is also going to keep, because some people like technology. I think that's one thing that we're seeing. My question is, like, if they're not in civil engineering, where are they going? I'm assuming it's software development.
That's exactly right.
So we as an industry need to face that reality. And I'm not saying we need to be software developers, but maybe there's some part of what we do that catches the attention of that person. And I was reading an interesting book. It's called Super Users by Randy Deutsch, I think is his last name, where he's making the point that some people are seeing in the AEC industry that software developers, these really technologically adept people, are turning to architecture for the point that was made earlier, is that there's a permanence to it. And it's one thing to build like an app that is going to be useless in 5 months because it's advancing so quickly. It's another thing to build a building that's going to last for a long time. If we can capture the imagination of those people, I think that's a different way of looking at maybe what we do as designers, but how we engage with the younger people.
Well, I think it's interesting because we hear at a leadership level a lot of the same thing of fear, not moving fast enough. What gets us to move faster? Because I know from where I sit, the real challenge, most things come down to money. Oh, we want to try this new software thing. Well, you're paying through the teeth for it. Who's actually vetting it, making use of it, and you're not spending all this money to use one sliver sort of it. So is there anything that you've thought of that helps people move faster in that kind of adoption?
Yeah, and I guess maybe I misspoke. The other thing is, like, faster is not the name of the game necessarily all the time. And I think a lot of times, like, the aspiration to be more efficient is not the same thing as the goal to build great buildings. Building great buildings is not always the most efficient thing. Buildings are unique. Every building's different. You're not designing the same car every time. So there's some inherent inefficiencies that I think we have to accept that, maybe recognize that. And I think one of the practical things that I'd love to implement more is, like, to technology, you can't, in a life of a project, you're not going to be able to implement the whole thing all at once. I think that's unrealistic, and there's so much risk that you have to absorb. I think maybe that's what you're getting at. It's like, how much risk are we willing to accept? And you have to give I think we should be giving a little bit of an opportunity of a little bit of risk to see where it could go. But the important thing is to test it on a real project, to set a timeline, and then to set expectations so that when you're done with the process, you can actually say, was that useful or not? Because just because the technology is out there doesn't mean it's actually useful, but we have to be able to explore it a little bit.
How much do you see that, Reinhardt, being in a larger multidisciplinary firm with multiple offices, as are you? And Michael, you are among the larger scale of lighting design specific firms, if not the largest. Being in a small, very boutique firm where we're sort of bootstrapping a lot of things, and our practices, our processes, and our standards are pretty extraordinary for a firm of our size. But as I'm listening to you, the question that's going through my head is, how does that scale if you're in a smaller practice and you don't have the broader capabilities and development and diverse disciplines that are inherent in both of your firms, and then I think you have some benefits of that just by sheer scale. How do the firms that are 20 people or a single user, someone who's practicing solo or in a partnership, how do those people leverage these tools?
One, a risk for you, say, for argument's sake, you put 2% of gross revenue to R&D, and we put 2% of revenue to R&D. It looks very different. And so I think you will see, I'd be curious on your view here, you will see the big firms take, I don't want to say bigger risks, but because they've got the 2% equals bigger, they can throw 10 million at AI in a year and see what happens. And it means the same as, 10,000 for a small firm, right? And you can do a lot more with 10 million. So I actually have been thinking about whether there's this is going to come out sounding wrong, but there's a responsibility for the bigger firms that have kind of conglomerated to say, what could this do? Because most firms, 95% of the firms won't have that kind of an investment. The other place where I see a potential nexus is in I'm going to call them our partners, Autodesk being one of the biggest for all of us. I was really blown away when I went to AU at what they were doing with AI, and they have the ability to invest in a way that none of us can invest because their business model is different. And we've, I think, very quickly shifted our viewpoint of the big software providers to a partner, not a transaction. What can we get with them, not are we buying their seats? So just a few thoughts. I think you will see the big firms, it will look like we're betting big, but because we've got more money to play with.
Well, I think to your point, Jay, a big firm can invest 10 million, but you can also go to that partner that has got, somebody handcuffed in a 10-person firm and say, we're not paying you this $25 million fee for your software. You don't give us any value. The incremental stuff, it's crap. We don't use it. You're developing for the sake of taking more of our money, right? So there's a full circle moment there that's actually quite opportunistic. Like, you guys can be investing in innovating, but you can also be pushing back on those tools. To your point, boutique firms cap at like 15 or 20. There's hundreds of sole practitioners that are making a living that are struggling because, they see this huge opportunity, but then the expectation from that sole practitioner is the same expectation of WSP. And like, that's just never going to happen.
On the podcast. I'm not sure that it is. Back to your point about where does the value in the relationship, you could make an argument that technology is not the play, right? That you have much stronger personal relationships with your clients. I think the bigger the firm, the more generic we probably seem to our clients. Are we really competing on relationship? I'd like to think we are. Or are we competing on our insurance policy?
Yeah.
Fair question. I'm curious if you had a response on that, your thought about tools for smaller firms.
I don't have a strong response, but I do appreciate you bringing that up because it's a really important point to recognize. And where I come from is different, and it basically brings up the question of risk and value. I think the things we're talking about here, and it's an important one to address. And I don't know. I do think one of the ways that those smaller firms could benefit from this thinking is the curriculum in the universities. The programs that students are going through is where they can learn these, and where a lot of them do learn these tools. Coming out of school, knowing how to do these different things and using. So we can rely on our universities, and being involved in these advisory boards is a really good way of making sure that, in a way, all firms have access to incredibly talented individuals.
You would also hope that organizations like the IALD or the IES would be in a position. There's a reason those organizations exist for the industry, is to provide a central sounding board to drive the market forward. I will be frank, I haven't kept pace with whether IALD has an AI, working group, committee. If they don't, I'd suggest that would be a place where the industry could say, hey, well, what does a pooled resource look like? where we can experiment together, reduce risk for everybody. Everyone's going to want to differentiate on top of that, but at least, rising tide lifts all boats, right? How could we leverage something like that?
I want to take the beauty of this conversation around how we're recognizing there's all these challenges. They're certainly translating into fears. But to me, what's fascinating is the lens at which each one of you has the opportunity to look through that. If we just quickly look at the cross section for the sake of the context and the audience listening, Jay's at WSP, there's 70,000 people, I think, roughly speaking. Lisa, you're at AKLD Lighting Design with 15 people. Reinhardt, you're at Smith Group, which is you guys are fully integrated engineering. How many people are there?
About 1,500.
Okay, 1,500. And Michael, you're at HLB Lighting, which is lighting only, and 135 people.
So for argument's sake, we're each 10x.
There's one commonality that you all have before you break off into the size of your firm and the specialties that you do, which is that built environment. When you look at the built environment and how you're impacting that, or how you're, pulling your niche into that, where do you feel like you are right now? And how eager are you to continue to evolve that?
As we said earlier, I am a lighting designer by background. I've said internally I'm a recovering lighting designer because I don't really do lighting design anymore. The role I'm in is representative of the conversation we were just having, which is how does a large firm think about their technology strategy, their digital strategy? And so I'm in a role that a year ago did not exist. WSP did not have a global digital strategy for where we wanted to go as a business. And in the last year, a little bit more than a year, maybe call it 2 years, but we now have a specific ambition for what does good look like, and roles that didn't exist formally to drive that ambition. So my job is to drive us into new markets that digital creates that we weren't in before. Yes, I work for a big firm. You could also look at that as 70,000 headwinds to how we used to work that need to be convinced. My job is as much a cheerleader for what we're capable of as it is, opportunity, right? So I've got a bunch of engineers who know how to do their job, who are good at their job, who've always done it this way. And I'm going to come in and say something like, well, what if instead of, selling the time for this design, we give it away for free in exchange for recurring revenues on the way that building is operated downstream. Let's put our money where our mouth is and say this design will be so good that you'll pay us every year for the joy of being in it, right? And that's a very different way for us to think about our value. Just a silly example for like what my job is to push us to say, okay, could we sell this differently? Would our client buy it? Is it aligned with the problem they have? Will technology help us get there? And then take some risks, but to the point about technology, if 1 in 10 of the products we're trying to take to market actually go into the green, I think we'll be quite lucky, right? I mean, that's not representative of like product development in general. So how do I convince a firm who is used to selling every time for a known or generally known, every hour for a known or generally known margin for let's invest a year in building this tool, and 9 out of 10 of them are probably going to flop.
That's a VC space.
It's a VC space. But we're coming from an engineering background. But I think we feel that if we don't look for opportunities in new revenue streams, in new markets, the shareholder expectations will not be delivered.
So it's basically buildings you're designing, and instead of the fee to design them, you're looking for, I'll call it royalties for use.
Potentially, yeah. So an idea that I think the industry is sort of experimenting with is if we designed really efficient ways to build buildings. So I'm avoiding saying modular here for a reason, but we're approaching this, right? Where you could select components and have it configured into a building that is 90% of the way there. And then firms like yourself could add that unique vision on top of it, is there a model where that is a recurring revenue stream for us, and it would be worth creating those toolkits, those libraries of the components that make up a building and selling them on the market versus keeping them internally and trying to charge a lump sum fee for design? We were talking before about big versus small. Somebody asked me what keeps me up at night, and I said it's not AECOM, it's not Jacobs. The problem we don't have, okay, we have it a little because we sell time and we're trying to hit revenue targets, but our general problem is not labor. So we think like a company with lots of people. What keeps me up at night? The guy in his garage. Because he's going to think, well, how could I automate something because I don't have people to do the work? Could I get it to lay out all the lights in this building for me based on a concept that I've trained it on? And the answer is yes. Anybody who says that's not going to happen is not reading the news. It will totally happen. I even think it will go beyond that, and we will train a model that looks like you and looks like you. We've already done this at WSP. We've done a knowledge AI model. And if we took every one of Michael's designs at the end of his career, right, and scanned them in and created a knowledge graph of what that looks like and said, apply it to this project, make me a Michael lighting design, I think you will be impressed with what you would see. It'll be 80% of the way there.
And then who physically needs to be in the driver's seat to finish that? To your point, Lisa, probably somebody who can drive a relationship home, and then a low-level employee who can like fine-tune the red lines that you do in your sleep because you're a pro and you're a boss and you've been doing it for 25 years.
Like I've walked into buildings and been like, this is a Gensler fit out. Feels like a Gensler fit out. Right? You kind of get a sense for like a style. That's an SOM building. Looks like an SOM building.
So Jay, when you look at pushing change in a large organization, you're the biggest at the table. Let's go to the opposite end of the scale. Lisa, look at AKLD Lighting Design. You guys are a boutique firm, and you're representative of a lot of lighting businesses that we'll just call in that like 5 to 10 person range.
In a total counterpoint to what you're talking about, and it's really the reason why I left a multidisciplinary firm with a lot of resources and frankly a really, a strong practice and a wonderful historic practice. I left because in my life, and I think for many of us that are and especially for women, I don't want to generalize, but I think especially for women, there's a real drive to find meaning in what we're doing day to day outside of the kind of the technical aspect of what we're practicing, and even beyond the design aspect, but more that people aspect. What I wanted to do and why I joined at KLD, it's been about 2.5 years now, and so it's still a very new role. It's less like, let's take over the world with totally different processes. It's a little bit more like, I think it's a perfect reflection. You're working at this huge macro level. I'm speaking a little bit more personally. I wanted to be in an environment where there was more of a focus on people than profit, and a kindness and a goodness about the way that business is approached. The area where I want to continue to focus and where I want to grow in the next year and 5 years, there are two things. I have learned through several different avenues that I really enjoy doing, fundraising and doing business development, and those things are wonderful, and I enjoy that, and I look forward to being able to do more of that in different avenues. And also I'm challenging myself and our firm as a whole. This is led by Anne, our founder, who's been bringing up some difficult questions, and it's prompted me to sort of dig in and think about those around what happens beyond our design process. And we've gone through getting a building, going through iterations and VE, and that building is built, and now we've left that with the owner. And maybe it's, quotes, not our problem, but what if in 5 years we're starting to see that there's a lot of early premature failure? And this is an industry-wide consideration. Others are talking about this, but I think we have to go beyond this sort of tighter lens of how do we improve our design processes to be more efficient? How do we capitalize on our fees and maximize our, our profitability? we need to be thinking much longer term. And that's not only a sustainability consideration, it certainly is, but I'm thinking of it just even from an operations standpoint of our clients wanting to call us because they know that we have an expertise to deliver a project that's going to last. And for us to do that, frankly, we all need manufacturers to really be delivering at a higher standard and have higher expectations of what they're doing around circularity. And so that's my kind of in my next year, pushing into that more and looking at the 5 years beyond when we get that building across the finish line. How do we make sure that what is in that building is going to last? How do we make sure that client is really happy and we haven't kind of inadvertently participated in planned obsolescence? So maybe, starting out a little bit more inspirational there, and that's the underpinning, but I do have some very specific goals about wanting to challenge our industry partners to do a better job around circularity and also the way that we're thinking about that as we approach design.
Do you see a space where lighting designers offer I don't know what the right phrase is, tune-up service?
And well, let me ask you a question back. Are you referring to controls? Are you referring to aiming? Are you referring to luminaires and some sort of review around, for instance, okay, it's time to replace this bank of drivers, or it's time to replace this module? Or is it all of the above?
I'm sort of thinking all across the
All of
board.
the above.
I mean, I won't say where it was, but we got paid to go out and test the light levels on a professional stadium once because they didn't think that they'd been replacing the lamps, but they felt like performance had deteriorated, and they were 50% off of starting target. They don't have the tools to even test that. I'm thinking, we take our cars in, we service our boilers, we do those things. Lighting doesn't have that kind of, people think of it as a permanent, it just is.
That's what, and Rachel Fitzgerald and I were talking last week because I wanted to get her take on this as well. And so I'll attribute this to her. She said, yeah, when we design LEDs, people think that they're being sold sort of a permanent forever solution. And that is one of the areas that our industry, I think we need to challenge manufacturers, but maybe the manufacturers' gaps for now are another revenue stream that would be available to us if we can sort of dodge being in the crosshairs of you designed this project where these luminaires are failing and now you need to fix it.
I see your point there. Yeah. I mean, there's a partnership there between the supplier and the specifier.
There is on this platform a podcast that will air after this with Rachel and Andrea Wilkerson from P&L discussing what Lisa just said in detail of how LED technology came at us fast. We got excited about it. There was a lot of reason to adopt it. And who's responsible for that? And the answer is we all are, and we need partnership. And then we can put the manufacturer at the table and they'll say, well, stop asking us to, do things differently. Why can't you just use what we've already created? And then it's a really fun conversation. Anyways, I'll let you guys chime in on our current vibe.
I think for me, where I currently still am is in lighting design in general, and maybe I have focused on that. Like I said earlier, a little bit about my personal stories. I've transitioned into more general architecture, or I'm trying to, because I think with a sort of an architectural engineering background, in a way, well suited to talk the language of other disciplines. And I think that's a powerful thing. That's a very useful thing in what we do. So I'm trying to focus my efforts more on leveraging computation, analytics, and digital tools at an integrated practice. So for me, what is really important is not even multidisciplinary, but sort of transdisciplinary thinking. And so for me, I'm really focusing in the future on not just creating challenges for the goal of creating challenges. That doesn't really help anyone. But finding the challenges, talking with the right people. I think what you're talking about, circularity, is a really good example. It's like, what in our industry, even zooming out architecturally, I think there are these trends, but you look at mass timber or looking at materials, okay, now it's getting to lighting as well. But what are the externalities that we have forgotten to include in what we think about during design? And I'm really interested in finding those things and then thinking about, can technology help us address those externalities, or how to internalize it so that we can better make decisions based on those things. That's really what I'm interested in. I don't know what those are. People are much smarter than I am. I need to have more conversations. But I can see that there's a lot of work for us to do, and that's kind of where my current focus is. I will say the other thing that I really like about what you were saying is, to me, it's sort of this like humanizing the experience in everything we do, and I find that's really really important. The last thing I'll say here is that for me, the computation and the gateway for me to get in that way was daylighting. And as a lighting designer, we understand daylight. And I think that's I found it a really useful way to get into more advanced technology is through daylighting, because it's also really important for sustainability and building performance and efficiencies, but it's ripe for computational design. It's how architects talk about buildings. And so for me, that's kind of where my focus is. I will say, and I'm really excited to hear you saying that you created this role. I am really nervous, and in that book I mentioned earlier, recognizing that these folks who are computationally savvy, but also people smart and know how to deal with clients, those roles don't quite exist everywhere, and that maybe their careers right now are more of a risk journey than a defined career path. And we as leaders should try to recognize that and make sure that we're also capturing what I think could be the future of what we do as an industry. People who know how to use the tools, but also know how to design and deal with people. That role doesn't exist clearly, I don't think. That's my opinion. But we can work to make those roles so that we can help address these externalities we're talking about.
You know, Reinhardt, I was just thinking as you were saying that, I have had 2 team members in the past that both came out of CU Boulder and super strong on coding and really good at that, like, and with divergence in people skills, variability there, but they both were so entranced with like coding and programming. One of them left the industry altogether and went and got a master's in programming and is off in that world now. And one actually just moved over to doing renderings using coding and scripting to be able to do renders for a firm that just wanted that capability in-house. And I think you've really hit on something that's important that we've all been talking about, which is that we have to find the ways to keep people with those skill sets in our industry, because we need those skill sets in our industry. And so what that looks like, maybe, I'm the least qualified to predict what that is, but
it's so good. Yes, you're right. Like, we need to transform as an industry. We need to quit saying these are the jobs, to your point, Jay, earlier. We need to quit saying these are the jobs that we do. We hire for them. This is what we pay. This is how we make money on it. Like, we need to, as an industry, figure out how to be willing to take more risk. And I understand that risk requires money and time. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go take out a small business loan or mortgage their house to do this. But, we need to really think outside of the box about what it is we're not doing. And the only way for us to think about what it is we're not doing is to get out of our own way. And I think that is so hard when we're fighting for something that we feel like isn't even appreciated or has a seat at the table.
Oh, I'm
sorry.
Good. Yeah, no, I'm good.
You just put me, as Sarah Schoenauer said, like, you put me above a 6 and I had to go to the 10s.
I've been spending a fair amount of time thinking about what does a career track look like for someone like this. And I think a place that has held building design back in our practice is the use of the term BIM guy. Anybody who's good enough with technology ends up getting that label. And that, I think it's hard to chart a forward path from that corner. And so, for a while I said, somebody with a minor in computer science is more valuable to me than necessarily what their major is. And I'm actually seeing a point where we're almost flipping it around and saying, is it easier to teach engineering to a data scientist, or is it easier to teach data science to an engineer? I think we're going to end up with a blend. But in order to attract and retain those people, we have to show them that there's growth, that they're valued, that they're seen as contributors to the firm, and that there's a place for them to go forward. Like, and we're starting to chart those paths, but we have a ways to go as an industry if we're going to be attracting those kinds of people into our field.
And I also really think it's important to recognize how powerful architecture is and making that known. Like, the work that you're doing really does matter. We all talked about at the beginning of the podcast why we love design. If we can capture the attention of those people who are so smart at figuring out these tools and employ them in an industry that has far-reaching impact. When we're talking about circular full life cycle, like material cost analysis, but where do those materials come from? Where do they end up going? Cradle to grave type of thing. Like, the impact that architecture has at a global scale is pretty big, let alone our personal interests. Let's grab these really smart, talented people to help us solve these things from within, so it doesn't just come from the outside. I think that's a charge that we should take on.
And let's celebrate that. Let's share that when fees are put forth. I mean, this all takes capital, right? Like, there is no easy answer to it, but we have got to find a way as an industry to really celebrate what we love and what we do, and not just try and be better than the competitor to keep the doors open or to keep your forecast because you're a publicly traded company, right? Like, we've got to find a way to celebrate our own brilliance, and I think we've got to do a better job marketing ourselves.
Well, we don't want to be the training ground for special effects artists. That's actually been an exit path for us, is you hire someone who knows architecture, you train them on Unity and Unreal, and then they go work for MGM because they're able to make a ton more money and do really cool stuff, and it was their knowledge of how buildings work that makes those VFX so compelling. It was eye-opening to me when I learned that Autodesk is actually one of the major providers of cinematic special effects. You look at some of the Marvel movies. I think Inside Out 2, that was done on Autodesk. It blew my mind. Like, Maya is that's their product.
I think maybe just a quick tangent. I thought it's a really interesting point is have you guys heard of the OpenUSD, the Alliance for OpenUSD? So IFC5 or whatever that whole system, I'm not a BIM guy. I'm clearly not the biggest, smartest guy on BIM, but IFC5 is being developed, but they're developing this new protocol, USD, Universal Scene Description, for how we transfer data. This is very technical speak, but the interesting thing points to, which I think is an interesting trend I'm just noticing, and the people that are involved in this alliance of OpenUSD, which is 3D modeling data transfer, NVIDIA, Adobe, Pixar, Autodesk, and a few others. That's really interesting to me, that they're now getting involved. I think of NVIDIA's like Omniverse. Is like, we talked about gaming earlier. It's similar. Like, the 3D world touches a lot more bigger players than I think we're used to in our industry.
Well, it's interesting because the 3D world is a tool in design, but the 3D world is the product, literally, and all these other, like Pixar, the 3D world is the product. It's like what you watch. The 3D world in NVIDIA's world or Unreal, like, it's the product. In gaming, it's the product. Like, I hate to say it, but like, design's the stepchild at this point of our number one tool, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like,
there's a partnership there, I think, is where you're heading. We're going to see I think it will be really interesting and maybe back to a theme we touched on earlier, which is like, how does our industry take advantage of technology, as looking at that as an opportunity to say, what is happening in film that we should be looking at?
I mean, yeah, just what do we want to do as dreamers and creatives that we've allowed ourselves to say no to because we didn't think it was possible? How easy is it to just start asking those questions? I don't know. I've got to let Michael chime in here, though, because, Michael, you really do sit as the biggest person in the room. How tall are you, by the way?
6'7". Yeah. I haven't started shrinking yet either, which is good. I check every once in a while.
Michael, you represent HLB in this conversation, and you represent arguably, one of the largest lighting design firms probably around the world. So you've got a lot to think about based on what's being said here at the table. But I know you've also got a lot you're working on. Where are you at?
Well, I think the interesting thing in hearing each of your stories and where you sit, it really is that I believe HLB, we do sit in that middle ground. In the business world, we're incredibly small. In the lighting world, we're incredibly large. And I think what comes with that is a lot of responsibility. And I think that's the way that we've thought about it is that while no, we can't put the level of money and time into research and development that WSP may be able to, we can do more, perhaps financially, than AKLD can. And so we've always had the mindset and taken the position, and you alluded to this earlier, Jay, is that we need to raise the game. And we need to help educate our colleagues. We need to help provide them with some of these tools. And in the business world, people may scoff in that and say, well, why would you share trade secrets, or why would you try to help do that? But the way that we've always looked at it has been, as we do that, it elevates the profession. And then as a competitive person, that just means I have to raise my game more. And so I think where we sit is in that spot of, we had to make a decision, I'll make it up, 7, 8, 10 years ago, of what did we want to be? Did we want to remain more of a boutique type firm that was very client focused and perhaps more about people, or did we want to try and grow and be more of an influencer in the market, in the field? And by no means was it an easy decision or one that we don't still navigate and go back and forth on and where we go, but it was to be that influencer. And we did want to grow, and we did want to be that beacon to say, if you want to as a business, you can grow and you can make this profitable and you can still focus on design and still be very people focused as well, while also making a profit and being a business. And what I've loved about the firm is that through that transition, and what attracted me to them in the beginning was the fact that I always had a voice. There wasn't private offices. That's the best kind of metaphor that I can use. I remember my first day having the exact same desk as my boss of 25 years who'd been in industry. And I could pick up the phone and call our CEO, call our president and say, I don't really like this part of what we're doing. Would you be interested in me, going down this path of investigation to try and improve it? And I think we've tried really hard to still do that. The challenge that we have is, as you grow bigger, there is some disconnect there. And how do you help wrangle everyone so that person A isn't going down a path of investigation that person B already has and realized it wasn't worth it? And so part of, I think, what we continue to challenge ourselves with is that higher level of communication and organization. And there's growing pains along the way. And I think right now we sit at an interesting point. You talked about, the classification and a BIM guy. Right now we're going down that path of saying those titles don't work anymore. And we need individuals that have a different skill set, that are willing to chart their own path. Yes, a lot of it in technology or efficiencies and things like that, but it's not BIM anymore. And so I think we're starting to create those paths and those roles. And I think our intention is to help generate that, to elevate the community as a whole, and to provide some of those tools and skill sets or things to groups at large. And so where I sit, I feel very lucky, but at the same time, I go back to my high school basketball days and one of my coaches saying that, yes, I believe I'm lucky, but I've also found that the harder I work, the more luck that I have. And so I feel lucky to be at the table with the rest of the shareholders and the owners that are helping drive HLB in this industry. And I'm thankful for that every day. And we all have different skill sets to it that, when we sit at the table, there's differing opinions. And through that, it's very much like design. You come to a consensus and at the end of the day, the right solution. And it may still end up taking you down a path that you look back on and say, well, that didn't work out. But we have the ability to take a little bit more of that sort of calculated risk that I think we're trying to lean into even more so now. And I think it really is that medium of what you all are dealing with, of perhaps needing to be more risk averse. We've now put ourselves in a position that we can be a bit more risky at a time where I think the industry needs it. And there's a lot of value that we can sort of provide there. So I'm also in that middle ground of, we have some leadership that are at the tail end of their career, some that are just kind of coming up in the ranks. I tend to think of myself in that middle. So how do I create and become that bridge for it all along the way? So it is hearing everybody's story and where I sit here, I really do feel like in the middle of it all. But yet with the opportunity to also yield a big stick within the lighting design world here as well.
It's an interesting point about sometimes I think the bigger any of us get, the more likely that everyone has worked for us, right? And I wonder how many ex-HLB people work for other firms. Probably every lighting firm in the U.S. of a certain size probably has an ex. There's a point where it's just like the numbers are going to work towards like people move, right? And so we've always viewed that, at our level, people move all the time. I don't remember what the stats were, but it was like in the U.S. we hire 50 people a week just to break even or something like that, right? The turnover is incredible. And that means that those 50 people go to our competitors. So the secret is not about that, right? It can't be about not internal knowledge. There's no secrets to stay because they all walk out with your employees, I guess is where I'm heading. And HLB's in a similar space. You'd be in a similar space where it's how you pull all that stuff together and create magic. It's not the individual pieces. That's not something you can hold.
And that's where I tend to go back to that relationship and personal side of things, because my mentors or folks that I mentor, yes, there's perhaps pieces of me that hopefully they can grab onto and help kind of bring into their own growth as a professional, but there is only one me. And as terrifying as it is that there might be some way of recreating me in the virtual world, right? There is only one me. And so I still go back to, yes, we have to push the industry and there's things that we can do, but to that point, it's still very much the people business. And my job is to form those relationships and deliver on what we promise, what we talk about with the client, and make sure that they remember that. And that's what hopefully sets us apart. And I think we probably all have those examples of clients that, they come to you because of what you did and how you treat them and that personal interaction. Because we all, as humans, you all want to feel worth it. You all want somebody to be focused on you in some capacity, right? And so we have to continue to push that. And it's a incestuous industry that we're all going to be going around. But that is what all helps us continue to sort of improve. So.
This conversation is brought to you in partnership with Nightingale, lighting powered by purpose. Nightingale develops luminaires that deliver beyond the usual expectation of what they should do in healthcare environments. As an expert medical brand, they make lighting about people, not just spaces, about feeling well, not just treatment. If you're passionate about lighting's positive impact on people, you want to discover the latest lighting innovations, and you also want to share your thoughts about the future of lighting, they'd love to hear from you. Visit nightingalelighting.com/discover to know more. Michael, you bring up the people, which is something I think that is multifaceted in the conversation of design. You mentioned, and we all joked about the digital version of Michael that Jay approached earlier. And of course, he's labeling the digital version of Michael because you are a person, but you just have skill sets that essentially we can copy, and then you no longer, let's say, have to exercise. And maybe that's helpful to you because then we can really double down on the people. We do all of this design not to make money, not to have careers. We're fortunate enough that we can all call it that, but we do it to create, the these bespoke spaces, these elegant environments, these energetically filled stadiums, these tranquil, peaceful, places to retreat to, or just maybe just a nice house to, call your home and enjoy. This is all done at the sake of giving people an opportunity to appreciate something. When you all look at where we're at today, when you look at what you're excited about, what you're working on, what you owe to the industry, what you're trying to navigate, move, groove, and touch, how do you view your role and your position to live with the decisions you make long term?
I'm happy. Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll jump in on that. And so I'd been referring to circularity, which I'm thrilled that there's now, TM65 to help manufacturers understand the actual carbon footprint of a luminaire through its life cycle. But TM66 is looking at circularity. And so to your question of how do we ensure that what we're doing is, how do we really measure that through a longer lifespan? Choose what number you want. If it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, we need to take cues from buildings of how long what's the cycle. But I think there's the day-to-day of how we're navigating design, and we've talked a lot about processes, and we've talked a lot about people. And I will say from personal experience, sometimes we learn the things that we want to do differently from an experience that we do have. And I've seen brilliant design with a lot of human collateral damage along the way from someone who has a vision that it comes at any cost to the people with whom they work. And so there's the desire to sort of be the antithesis to that, as far as the way that I'm engaging with people, and our firm has that ethos as a whole. But I'm also really excited about the way that one of the things that I saw at Light in Building, and Ann and I sort of dissected the top 4 things that were our takeaways from Light in Building after being there this March. The top one was under this heading of sustainability, which is almost the wrong term, because I think we all now have this idea of what sustainability is, and it's almost one of those charged terms that you sort of have made your decision about sustainability, like the election. Most people had made up their mind about who they're going to vote for long before the election, so I think people have made up their mind about sustainability. Circularity is a better term if we talk about that long-term impact of a luminaire as part of an entire building system, including controls in a building. And we were very excited to see European manufacturers, certain of them, focusing much more on the idea of not just the sustainability and the carbon footprint of the luminaires themselves, but also looking at that circularity. What happens if there are premature failures at a fixture? That is going to happen, and despite all the best controls in the factory, sometimes things happen during installation. Stuff happens. So how do we ensure that in a model where facilities people have been used to replacing components, and that's the comfort zone, and we've had Edison lamps with E26 socket bases for 100 years, how can we use that model and pair it with LED technology to create something that has a much better whack at not being, that LED fixture failed, rip the whole thing out of the ceiling, toss it in the landfill, and let's get something new in here. And by the way, we're going to buy the cheap one next time, because if they're just going to fail like this, why are we going to spend the money for the fancy stuff? So I'm happy to see our industry, certain manufacturers really leading the charge. And I'm confident that as more of us have a louder voice to manufacturers about what we want to see around modularity, around circularity, around replaceability on behalf of our owners and on behalf of an industry that can generate a lot of waste if we're continuing to see a lot of premature failures, frustrated owners who don't know what to do with them, and they just decide to rip them out of the ceiling and buy a new one because that's what they think is what they should do. Having replaceable components and having manufacturing partners that are helping to create a whole system of predicted replacement for components, where they hire us for our expertise to help them through that. I'm really excited about that in our industry. It's a challenge right now, and I feel like it's going to continue to be a challenge, but there's going to be a point where all of us, including our owners who are writing the checks, become vocal enough about expecting that from our manufacturers, that the process of LEDs being this like, well, we send you this thing and you stick it in the ceiling. If it doesn't work, you pull the whole thing out and you send it back to us. If you even know who we are, where we are, like simple things like QR code on the luminaire that has all of the information about that luminaire spec, who's the manufacturer, how do you get replacement parts. That's brilliant. That's the simplest and most brilliant thing that I'll name drop. Zoomtobal's doing that. I hope more manufacturers start to do that kind of thing. So I'm very bullish and feel very challenged, but very bullish about our industry taking the long view past the initial excitement about LEDs and really understanding how, as part of a system, including controls, we can have something that is a wonderful environment, but it's also something that's not just a headache for the owner, regardless of how beautifully it photographed and how many awards it won. It has to stand the test of time. So I'm excited about that.
You know, one thing that's interesting about what you said was the QR code.
I think that's there is an industry standard for that, and I assume Zoomtobal's probably following it. And it's a place where I think lighting can look to other industries for that kind of stuff. I would assume Zoomtobal's probably following some sort of European standard for how that stuff works, but it's a place where I have, having stepped out of lighting, if I had a surprise moment when I go back into it, is how myopic lighting can sometimes be. And sort of saying there are other people thinking about asset life cycle and how do you manage this and how would we track all of it and how would we replace it? Not that they're doing perfect jobs, but I think it's a place where we can all do better as say, like, what else is going on, elsewhere? If Mercedes can sell airplane engines that are charged as a SaaS model, we can certainly think about lighting
a little bit differently.
I'll just expand on that because I think the word that comes to my mind is transparency, material transparency. And that is a thing in architecture already. Like other disciplines do try to be material transparent. The lighting industry, I think, can do a little bit better in that. Just to maybe even raise the stakes a little bit, there was the interesting, I can't remember if an IS webinar or not, I did not attend, but some colleagues did, where they compared the lighting industry, like manufacturer, product, design to fast fashion. The ethical question of things as well. And that to me is also transparency. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done in there. I'm glad people are talking about it. But yeah, just want to add that in there as another thought.
I think it's interesting that you use the word transparency because the lighting industry is terrible with it.
From
we all
sales
just
to
in
product,
general, right?
yeah.
We all this is, and maybe this is what I should have thought of and been provoked with some of the earlier questions, is the manufacturing procurement process cycle is unbearably terrible. Without hesitation, it is the worst thing that any of us have to deal with, where we have to tell a client, I think it might cost this, but I guarantee you that I'm wrong. It might be more expensive, it might be less expensive, I don't know. And I don't know who's making money off of it or any of that, but it's not me. And Lisa, you had brought up earlier, one of the real inflection points is now with the change in the code of ethics of the ILD, what is that going to mean? And how are people going to jump into possible procurement distribution or not? And we're probably going to see some failures along the way because people dive in head first and it doesn't work out. But the transparency of the industry, boy, if we want to course correct and do something quickly, do that. Because that's how we get owners with the checkbook to buy in of, oh, we do have professionals at the table who know what they're doing. Because we can scream it from the mountaintops, but when we sit there and tell them, well, I don't really know how much this is going to cost because of the backwards way that everything is bought and procured and everything, then we're never going to get that serious consideration with it all. So that would be, and I don't know what the solution is. I will say that I've struggled with it ever since I started. And once I caught a glimpse of how this whole process worked. And I desperately think it needs to change. And maybe that's where technology comes in. Maybe that's, I don't know. But I would certainly hope that, and this will be the challenge to myself and my team, I'm hoping we can change that.
You see it happening in other markets. If you look at I mean, I'll shout out Schneider here. They do, sort of, I think it's a carbon footprint transparency on each of their products from cradle to grave. You can see exactly where it went. Now, look, are they cooking the books on what they cost? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that procurement model looks like. I know what you. I think we all know what you mean in lighting. It will be amazing to see if. I mean, that is a place where technology should be able to say, this is. Even if they can't say this is exactly what this light costs because they won't sell it off the shelf, but they can say based on 1,000 transactions, this is what that light should cost.
There's already, I think, new age distributors who've been cataloging this data, and obviously like the biggest electrical distributors out there have data behind it. Every rep has that data. So it's less of
if Google can do it for flights, we ought to be able to do it for lights. Hey, it even rhymed.
Nice.
It really comes back to the willingness to develop new channels. And nobody that's in the current system is going to pivot out of it. So it's going to come from something external, or as Jay mentioned earlier, the guy in the garage who sees the opportunity, who's willing to move fast, pivot, and failure isn't an option. Well, because they really haven't succeeded yet. But like, that's the beauty of entrepreneurship. I want to get back. It's an awesome conversation, but I do want to get back to when we think about what you guys are doing today in the built environment and how that affects it. Lisa talked about circularity and the impact that makes on people long term, and the social responsibility that exists across all aspects, including manufacturing. Reinhardt, what do you think is top of mind for you and your firm in your own personal practice?
Yeah, for me personally, I wrote down one sort of phrase, which is, for me personally, is to be a trusted advisor. And if I feel like if I've done my job well, I am that to our owners, our clients, and to our team members. And so I kind of always ask myself that, like, if someone calls me, my response is going to be, I may not know how to solve it, but let's figure it out. And I feel like that's my attitude and how I strive to approach work and how I would approach my business. And then the other thing is, I recognize that with architecture and some of these things we're talking about, risk and life cycle and like the longevity of which we build for, and when things actually get built, when we get to the reality of building a thing, at some point, something is going to go wrong. The question is, who's going to call you, and are you ready to pick up the phone call? And what's your relationship with that person? And is there enough trust that you can work through that issue? Because something will go wrong. And I think that's where design is different than a software development app. And I think that that's something that I try to work on, try to focus on.
What about you, Michael?
Well, I think as I've worked in industry, I love the permanency of what we do, yet I also recognize how quickly it can change. I always hear from some of my colleagues about that, when you really have made it when you're redesigning one of your previous designs. I don't think I've had that yet, but I think as I've approached my professional career and where I still sit here, lighting is my medium to connect with people. Mostly it's meant to be on a personal level with staff, with colleagues. We joked about the incestuousness of our industry. It's incredibly small. And I love that about it. And so where I sit here, the built environment is my medium to connect with people, hopefully help guide and introduce them to a passion that I have developed over the years, as well as, frankly, give them the ability to financially support themselves, have a family, buy a house. Yeah, it's a lot harder now than it was 10 years ago. And so this is business, and I love what I do, and I want to continue to impact people. And the top of my list are the people that work as part of my team, as part of our firm. And then it branches out there to the clients that we work with, the buildings that we create, and all those people that are interacting with it. I'm thankful that we have this, and the reason we're having this conversation is I'm both excited and scared of where our industry is headed. But I think I go back to what I tell my team and I try to tell myself. I want folks to be comfortably uncomfortable. You should be comfortable in the skill set that you have, the foundation that you have, but maybe not know how you'll get there. And hopefully as an industry, we can sit there and not just be comfortable in our laurels that we've been here, we've done it before, but recognize the challenges that we have in front of us and have confidence that, well, we've navigated other things before. Is it different? Sure. But we have the skills, the knowledge base, the passion to do so. And so that's the way I'm going to try and continue to approach it today and here in the future, is that I don't know what's next, but I do know that I have the skills to navigate it and the right people around me to help educate myself, as I've learned a lot in this conversation, of where it's going and how to be there.
I'm a technology optimist. I like to think about new ways to do stuff. I like to challenge business as usual. And I think success for me, and I'm arguably at the halfway point or possibly over the halfway point in my career. I'm 45, so it's in that range. I hope that I can maintain that curiosity and the drive to sort of challenge, is this the best way to do it? Is there a new way to do it? And not sort of say, this is the way we do the thing. I've solved it. I'm done. There's no more innovation to happen. There's no new technology that will come better than this. So how do I maintain that sense of curiosity, that sense of sort of challenging the status quo, I suppose? I'm pretty sure that's a WSP challenge the status quo. So I feel like the corporate speak has really sunk in at this point. When I think about how my clients view me, either internal clients, a WSP that I'm working with to sort of think about how their teams could do something differently, or an external client that's engaged us to think about innovation, that they see me as a partner that hears what they're saying, understands their challenge, understands the outcome we're trying to get to, and brings, new ideas and challenge to that conversation. I'm not the technology guy that you want coding anything. I recognized that about myself a long time ago. I'm not the guy that's going to do the thing, but I can certainly help, hopefully, identify the vision of what that thing could do.
Challenging the collective design industry, what are your hopes for the industry in terms of innovation and inclusivity? And what are your thoughts on, the balance between technology and human creativity?
I think my dream would be that while this technology comes into play, into the design process even more so, my hope is that there isn't the expectation that all of a sudden everything can or should get faster. In the design world, I think we benefit greatly from taking a deep breath. Yes, seeing something, but then walking away and coming back to it. And so the one thing we can't make more of is time. So there's the push to do things faster, but I also want everyone to be able to enjoy that process. And so I don't want to be in a position in which technology improving, all of a sudden the expectation is everything can get faster, because I'd still like to enjoy the ride a bit while I'm on it.
Jay, what do you got?
I think that we should use this to solve the unsolvable. How do we set our ambition to say, okay, what are the problems we couldn't solve before that technology and design are going to solve going forward? We touched on a few. Circularity, carbon, supply chain has come up. I think there's huge opportunities. I hope we continue to ask the right questions.
I would see a huge opportunity for the use of more technology and tools, including AI or more coding and scripts, to automate some of the things that maybe we've told ourselves the story that, well, because you did, 300 iterations of this photometric, it makes you a better lighting designer. I walked uphill to school 5 miles in the snow, and I walked back home 5 miles uphill in the snow every day, and you should too. That's what makes you strong. It builds character. So I would hope that actually automating some of those repetitive tasks so that our jobs can be focused on the creativity. I do agree that there are parts of design that AI is going to, into which AI will encroach, but the actual genesis of design in a way that assimilates the human experience, I don't see that going away, having people involved. But can we automate and take out of the workflow some of those really repetitive drudgery, you know, like boxing the things on the cut sheets? You know, you gave that example. Yeah. And actually an outcome of this conversation that I thought was really fascinating, and I appreciate that we all crystallized it, is that we, as a discipline, I'm saying lighting design, including you know, yeah, of course, that we as a discipline really need to think about what it is we're not doing and look to other industries outside of lighting. So bringing in people who have expertise outside of lighting design, that bring in digital tools that really improve what we're doing and keep us competitive, keep us moving faster, keep us innovating. I am excited about that. That's actually a thank you to all of you and Sam for putting us together. I now have that as a very crystallized thought to take going forward about how we remain relevant. And some of it is just sort of kind of opening the gates, opening the arms to let's be open to other talent that doesn't necessarily fit in our tidy box of what we've seen or the roles in a lighting design firm. So I'm excited about those balances between technology and human creativity.
Oh, I love that. That was so good. I think for me, I'm going to build on these ideas a bit. And for me, the points are, I think what's important is in my dream is when we start to automate these things, let's make sure we give ourselves the opportunities and the freedom to be creative, because I think you have to make that happen. Especially if you think about like the people who are going to be learning how to automate our processes may not have the responsibility of then being the lead designer. Let's give those people a voice once they automate. And then the other thing is I think we can and we should be the stewards of change in our industry. I think let's take on that charge seriously and really be the change makers within our industry. Because if it's not going to happen from us, it's going to happen from someone else. I'd rather see us brilliant people leading the charge. And then similar to your last point, I think it's remaining open to new opportunities in design, technology, being critical at the same time, always asking if that's actually the right thing to do. And I will end with a question because it's one of my favorite quotes. I think it's by Cedric Price. Years ago, he said, "Technology is the answer. What is the question?"
That's a wrap, eh?
I want to thank the four of you for your time. I want to thank everybody who's made it through this with us listening, for joining the journey of what is truly an opportunistic time in the design industry and lighting and many other things. As a reminder to all of you, just remember that who you are is great and who you are is enough. While we're competitive, while we're innovative, while we seek to desire to do more, be proud of everything that you do. Be proud of the work that you have done. And don't be afraid to shout it from the rooftops, but at the same time, enjoy the ride along the way. I wish the four of you a wonderful holiday season. I hope everybody that is listening to this has enjoyed the holidays. And go crush it this year. And make it a year that really is one you want, you deserve, and you accomplish something because you put your mind to it. That's how we change, and that's how we move forward. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Sam. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Light Pod. In case you didn't know, this entire episode was actually also produced with a video attached to it. So make sure wherever you listen to this, you think about watching it next time. It's amazing the connection you'll have when you not only listen, but you watch the brilliant minds who join us to celebrate the people, the process, and the product behind design. Until the next episode, stay brilliant, be bold, and never let your inspiration go. I'll talk to you soon. See ya.